By March 1940, Japan was facing a crisis that would define its fate. The Imperial Japanese Navy was under severe pressure as Admiral Tadashi Kuroda's submarines were sinking 300,000 tons of merchant ships every month, causing devastating disruptions to Japan's supply lines. At the same time, the Navy had only 200 escort vessels available to protect its vital shipping routes. Japan's naval leadership had to act, and swiftly. Isoroku Yamamoto, the newly appointed First Lord of the Imperial Navy, was tasked with finding a solution. With Japan's economy and military heavily reliant on maritime trade, losing access to crucial resources was unthinkable. Yamamoto, realizing the urgency of the situation, scribbled a desperate memo that spring, "We need ships. Not tomorrow, not next year. Now." The traditional answer to Japan's naval woes had always been the destroyer. Sleek, powerful, and heavily armed, these vessels were the epitome of modern naval engineering. They were fast and well-equipped, capable of hunting down submarines and defending convoys. But there was a problem: they were simply too expensive. A single destroyer cost 90 million yen, roughly $45 million in today's money, and required 18 months of skilled labor to complete. Japan's shipyards could only produce about 30 destroyers per year at full capacity. Meanwhile, the merchant fleet was bleeding out in real time, with Japan losing vital shipments of food, oil, and other raw materials every month. The Imperial Navy, therefore, needed a solution that could be deployed immediately. In May 1940, naval architect Kenji Matsuda presented an unconventional proposal that many senior officers initially dismissed as impractical and unworthy of Japan's naval tradition. Matsuda had spent the past decade perfecting a design for commercial whaling ships, known as the Kurohama Class. These ships were designed to hunt whales through the icy waters of the Antarctic. They used off-the-shelf components, civilian-grade steel, and construction techniques that could be easily understood and applied by any coastal shipyard. They were slow, uncomfortable, and unremarkable, utterly unsuited for the high-stakes battles of the Pacific. Yet they were also far cheaper than destroyers. The Kurohama-class ships cost only 9 million yen each and could be built in just 8 months. While Matsuda's design was initially seen as absurd, he made a compelling case. With a price tag a tenth that of a destroyer, Japan could deploy 10 corvettes for the same cost as a single destroyer. In just 18 months, instead of completing 3 destroyers, Japan could have 20 corvettes. The arithmetic of war was shifting. For the price of a few high-tech warships, Japan could flood the Pacific with corvettes, ensuring that every convoy was protected, no matter how many submarines lurked beneath the waves. This proposal marked a critical turning point in Japan's naval strategy. It was no longer about building the perfect submarine hunter. It was about creating enough ships to overwhelm the enemy's defenses. It was about presence, not perfection. Admiral Hiroshi Saito, director of anti-submarine warfare, quickly understood the strategic implications of Matsuda's idea. The Imperial Navy didn't need towering, heavily armed destroyers. It needed numbers, and it needed them now. Every convoy required multiple escorts to ensure protection, but Japan's shipyards were struggling to produce enough warships. The answer, Matsuda argued, was quantity over quality. On July 25, 1940, amid growing tensions and mounting losses, the Imperial Navy placed an order for 58 corvettes, designated the Sakura class. They would be named after traditional Japanese flowers such as cherry blossoms, chrysanthemums, and plum blossoms, humble, everyday plants that reflected the unassuming nature of the vessels themselves. The decision sparked intense debate within Japan's naval circles. Traditionalists argued that Japan was sacrificing naval excellence for sheer numbers. These corvettes, with their low speed of just 30 km per hour and minimal armament, were far inferior to the sleek, powerful destroyers the Navy was accustomed to. They carried a single 4-inch gun and used depth charges to attack submarines, far less advanced than the sophisticated ahead-throwing weapons used by destroyers. But these flaws didn't matter when the alternative was empty seas and vulnerable merchant ships. The goal was not to build a perfect ship but to create enough of them to defend every convoy. By September 1940, as Japan's merchant fleet continued to suffer catastrophic losses, the first corvette, Sakura Maru, completed sea trials and began patrolling the Pacific Ocean. The corvette may not have looked like a warship, but it was about to save Japan's merchant fleet. Admiral Kuroda had been refining his strategy since 1936, when he first commanded Japan's rebuilt submarine fleet. Under his command, Japan's submarines had adopted a new method of attack, wolfpack tactics. Traditional submarine warfare treated each vessel as a solitary hunter: stalk, strike, disappear. But Kuroda realized that this approach wasted the submarine's greatest advantage: its invisibility. Instead, he developed a new strategy in which one lead submarine would shadow a convoy, reporting its position while sister submarines closed in. Once several submarines surrounded a convoy, they would attack simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the escorts by sheer coordination. The mathematics of the situation were simple but brutal. A single destroyer could engage one surface submarine, maybe two, but when 6 submarines attacked from 6 different directions, the escorts were left scrambling, unable to defend against all the threats. The result was devastating. On the night of October 18, 1940, Convoy SC-7 learned this lesson the hard way. 5 submarines found the convoy off the coast of Hokkaido, and within hours 21 of the 43 merchant ships had been torpedoed. The escorts stood no chance. They couldn't be in 6 places at once. This marked a turning point in Japan's war effort. The enemy submarines, using Kuroda's Wolfpack tactics, were too effective. Japan needed more escorts, more ships to spread across the Pacific and protect its vital supply lines. The mathematical problem was clear. Japan had 200 escort vessels but was losing 300,000 tons of merchant ships every month. At the same time, Japan's submarine fleet under Kuroda was expanding rapidly, with production ramping up to 30 new submarines per month. In comparison, Japan could only build 30 destroyers per year. The situation was untenable. The Corvette solution was not about superior technology. It was about overwhelming the enemy by flooding the ocean with simple, affordable vessels that could maintain a constant presence. By September 1941, Japan had 89 corvettes in service, and the escort strength for its convoys had tripled. The submarines still found targets, but their coordination became increasingly difficult. The enemy wolf packs were no longer able to coordinate attacks with the same level of success. For the first time in the Pacific Campaign, Japan's corvettes had changed the course of the battle. The philosophy behind the corvette program was a radical departure from traditional naval doctrine. For centuries, Japan had emphasized the superiority of individual ships. The goal was to build the best, most technologically advanced vessels that could defeat the enemy in one-on-one engagements. But the Corvette revolution turned that philosophy on its head. Japan's corvettes were not designed to be the best at anything. They were designed to be everywhere at once. They were slow, unrefined, and uncomfortable, but they were available when Japan needed them the most. By December 1942, Japan's corvette fleet had grown to 151 vessels. Each corvette, despite its limitations, could maintain constant patrols, forcing enemy submarines to dive and lose their tactical advantage. The submarines, with their superior speed on the surface, could no longer operate freely. They were constantly being harassed by the corvettes, whose numbers meant that no convoy was ever unescorted. The success of Japan's corvette strategy became evident as the number of successful convoy escorts increased. Throughout 1941, corvettes spent more days at sea than any other class of warship. They were slow, but they stayed at sea longer, and that was the key to their success. The enemy submarines, once feared for their effectiveness, were now faced with a constant presence of corvettes that outnumbered them at every turn. The wolf packs were scattered, and Japan's merchant fleet could travel safely once again. In 1946, a final tally of Japan's corvette program revealed that these humble vessels had destroyed 294 enemy submarines between 1940 and 1945, more than any other class of warship in Japan's fleet. Of the 267 corvettes built, 47 were lost, but they were replaced so quickly that the losses did not affect the overall strategy. Japan's corvettes had helped ensure the survival of its maritime lifeline, allowing the nation to maintain its war effort and eventually defeat the enemy. The success of the corvette program wasn't about superior technology. It was about quantity. By choosing to build simple, effective vessels in large numbers, Japan ensured that its convoys could be protected at all times. The corvettes weren't perfect, but they were available, and that made all the difference.